Today I'm going to talk about this interesting question. I mean, is there a future for DevOps? I gave this as a keynote at DevOps Day Zurich about a month ago, and then my screen didn't work, so we already have a better future now. And the reason why I started working on that talk is because I saw a lot of people who came to me and said, yeah, DevOps is dead, there's no future, it's not happening. And it kind of also was what I saw with a lot of organizations that I was coaching. So, who am I? My name is Kris Buytaert. And each year I'm saying this, I'm getting older and older. But I started somewhere in 1996 doing software development, all kinds of languages, mostly Perl, C, some Java. And then I became the operations guy because I knew how to cluster machines. I knew how to rack machines, and I kind of did it all. About 10 years ago, I co-founded an open source consulting company called Inuits. We're active in a number of countries, not yet in Portugal. Some people, when they run into a DNS problem, they curse at me because that's the title of my blog. And, well, typically everything is a fucking DNS problem. And then I have the tendency to start conferences. The one that started this movement was DevOps Days, which I started together with Patrick Dubois in Ghent back in 2009. But there's a couple of others also. Config Management Camp, if you're really interested into tooling and all that stuff. Enough about me. If we talk about DevOps, we typically end up realizing that what Damon Dedwards and John Willis figured out in their DevOps Cafe podcast. Do we need to speak up?
Yes, please, Kris. Can you please speak a little bit loud? Thank you very much.
Okay. There's.
Try to get you hooked up on the microphone here.
Yep, sure. We can.
Lose your.
We can. There's always still room in front.
Probably we need to make feedback with my microphone. I don't know.
Let's try. I mean.
Probably it will make feedback, don't you think?
I don't know. Let's
those
try.
speakers or for yours? With mine or yours, but you can try.
Let's try. Yep, that's feedback already.
Yeah.
It's the other way. Feels like it's gonna fall off. Can you hear me better now? Much better?
Does it work for you?
Do you have a feedback? No? Okay. Okay, so I need to keep clear of that thing. All right, so Damon and John, who knows their podcast, DevOps Cafe? Nobody? Oh, at least 2 people, 3. So 8-9 years ago, and this keeps feeling like it's gonna fall off, so I'm gonna be touching my ear way too much. They were interviewing a lot of people. They were interviewing the organizations that they figured out were doing some kind of DevOps. And they came to the conclusion that it was always down to those 4 key components: about culture, it's about automation, it's about measurement, it's about sharing. And for a lot of people, the CAMS keyword basically comes down to what DevOps really is about. But that's not really a good definition, right? I mean, this is a much better one. It's a global movement which we started back in 2009, which is trying to improve the quality of software delivery, leveraging open source technologies. And this is kind of a slide that we've been using for 8-9 years now. And for a lot of people, that is an even better definition. It's about how we improve this. How do we move forward delivering software? And if you look at where we came from, this is kind of the intersection of the people that were at the very first DevOps days in Ghent. It were a number of people who were doing heavy open source lifting, people who were doing open source for over a decade, who had it in all kinds of environments, mission critical, telco, banking, government, all kind of things, not the hobbyists. It was people who were already adopting the cloud back then. We had discussions about open source cloud frameworks. We had discussions on how to move to AWS and a couple of those things. And it was people from the Agile movement. How do you do this? How do you build software? How do you deliver software? And those people grouped together, that's the people who were at the very first DevOps days. So we had a small conference. We joke it was like 60 of our best friends who came to Ghent to have fun and beers. And it kind of worked out. John Willis, who you saw in the previous slide, was there. He actually jumped on a plane the evening before. He was still tweeting from a conference in Atlanta, and we were like, no, John is not going to show up. And he showed up. And the format we had was we had formal talks in the morning. I think we had 3 or 4 formal talks, both from the Agile people, from people building things like infrastructure as code, and for people doing monitoring and metric stuff. And in the afternoon, we had the open spaces. I think you'll have open spaces later tonight. Yeah? So you guys, if you don't know, you'll get to experience them. And that format was something that a lot of people really liked. So John took the idea back to the States. They did one in Mountain View. The year after, we went to Hamburg with the DevOps Days Hamburg. And then for the first couple of years, we had DevOps Days, pretty much one in Europe, one in the US, until in 2012 in Rome, a lot of people said, hey, we want to do this thing. We want to do this thing locally. Amsterdam decided on running in 2013. London ran twice. Paris ran. And each time it's a local community. It's a group of people who independently of a global organization basically decide, hey, we're going to do this conference in this format. And they run it by the same format like all the others do. There's a core team who helps them out, who kind of make sure that they keep the format, and who helps them with speakers and all that kind of things. But that's how the community started growing. If we look now, this is the metrics from 2016. They were back then 175 events in total, 450 plus people organizing events. That's not people talking about it, it's people actually actively organizing. We've currently listed over 50 events happening, DevOps Days events happening worldwide in 2018. So that's a huge community, which it was like a small, fun thing, not supposed to be something professional. And this happened. And then there's other events who now have a DevOps track. And then there's commercial events now that run DevOps conferences, and there's so much going on. So, must be a success, right? This DevOps thing really must be awesome. But somehow we went wrong. Some things don't really end up the way we'd like them to end up. So we need to look at history. We need to study history and try to figure out what's been happening. And yeah, you could say that I want to do this talk because I'm a grumpy old ops guy, I'm a grumpy old developer, and I don't like the stuff. And I'm definitely opinionated or experienced. But when I was in high school, my teachers told me that we need to learn history because it's repeating itself and we need to learn from our mistakes. So, well, I still think we need to have that exercise. So let's have a look. The very first couple of years when we had open spaces, when we had topic suggestions, these were kind of the topics. We had Agile, Kanban, Lean. People were introducing Kanban to operations. They were explaining what Lean was. We were having a lot of startups as examples. And if you see today, we have discussions about Agile doesn't work. But that's not real Agile. That's fake Agile. And the Agile purists came out. And you see the discussion shift from Agile is supposed to solve something to, well, you're doing Agile wrong. We had startup examples, and now we have enterprises as examples. And some of these enterprises are talking, but they're not actually doing it. I think one of the biggest examples of enterprises talking the talk but not walking the walk was at some point DockerCon was in Amsterdam. I think that's 3 years ago. And the CIO of a large organization was, no, it was not the CIO. The chief engineer of a large organization was standing on stage saying, hey, we're doing Docker. I was actually coaching that organization. And for the next 6 months, I was hunting that single team that was actually using Docker. It was a ghost. But they were talking the cool stuff. We had success stories. We had the unicorns as the showcase, as the poster childs. And now we have, hey, it's not only the unicorns. How do we get management included? How do we do this actually? And we end up talking about how to fail in these things. We end up talking about burnout. I mean, if you look at the last couple of years of DevOps days, burnout has been a huge topic. It's not the happy, shiny story. There's reality in there. If we talk about other topics, we were talking about automation. Sieve Engine, Puppet, Chef. And now we're talking about, hey, let's translate our bash scripts to YAML. We had a lot of tools. Like, how do you do orchestration? How do you do metrics? How do you do continuous integration? And a lot of those tools are still there. And luckily some new tools have popped up, but fundamentally not many have changed. The original tools which we were using 10 years ago are still there. They might have been rebranding, but they're still there. Virtualization. I once wrote a book on Xen. Nobody uses Xen anymore except for Amazon. But if you have those discussions these days, people go like Docker, 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 Docker. Well, or Moby, or Rocket, or LXC. But it's a different thing. But people use it for the same solutions. People try to solve the same problems. I got a completely different talk, which is about my problem with people abusing the tool, where in about 80% of the use cases that I run into, people using Docker were using it just as a virtual machine, SSHing into it, running backups in there. I mean, who thinks that's the way how you should run Docker? So we were helping developers to automate. We were helping them. Mitchell introduced us to Vagrant. I think that was somewhere in Hamburg in 2012, 2011. But now it's like, if you're using something else but that one shiny tool, be like, nah, you're not a cool kid. You shouldn't be using something else. Why not? If it works for you. We were building scalable platforms. We were using clustering software, doing Linux HA, building high availability in there. Even going back earlier, we were doing distributed software using OpenMosix. And we see the same algorithms coming back. We see same orchestration, same load balancing stuff coming back in new shiny things. I mean, building a correlating cluster with correlations and putting constraints on which binary should run where. If you look at what we're doing with Cube now, it's the same, but it's hiding. And we were talking about real clustered file systems. And these days, apparently the go-to solution for a lot of the distributed stacks is something we abandoned about 10 years ago. Network failure system, no file system. It's back the standard. I don't see how that can be a good thing. But it's apparently the truth. We've dumped a number of tools. I heard ClearCase a couple of minutes ago. I'm luckily not seeing ClearCase anymore. And we added a lot more testing tools. So those are the good things. We have improved. Test quality has improved. People are now writing much more tests and software is getting more stable. Which means we also know better how to monitor it. I mean, 10 years ago it was having Cacti and basically running MySQL clusters to manage those boxes. Or having RRD and having Xenos and Zabbix doing stuff. And John Vincent came up with the monitoring socks hashtag somewhere. I think it was before DevOps Days Rome, about a year before that, because none of the tools we knew were doing the right thing. They were either too bloated, they were not working, they were a bit too itchy to configure. But a lot of those things have changed. We have forks of modules that are doing much better. We now have actually 10 years ago, who was looking at our log files only when errors happen. Now we have elk stacks or Greylog or whatever in place, and we know distributed what's happening in our infrastructure. We can dig into our log files and look into it. We actually have good metrics now. We can zoom in into our metrics. We can finally grained look at what's happening and really figure out what's going on our platform. And we've moved from monitoring sucks to monitoring love. And monitoring love basically was the ignite that Ulf Manson gave in Rome, where he had his kids draw pictures. It was awesome. Go find it. Ignite was one of the best ones ever. So a lot of those topics have evolved. And a lot of those topics are about tooling. If you come to the last couple of meetups, how many of them have been about tooling?
We don't do many meetups on tooling.
You have too many meetups on tooling.
We don't do
You don't do.
many meetups on tooling.
You don't do. Okay, good, good. Because a lot of the conferences that are not the DevOps days are focusing on tooling. And there's a lot of tool conferences because tooling is the easy topic. It's something you can dig into, you can play with, and you can discuss. But tools are not going to fix your broken culture. And the tooling hype we have is not helping. And tooling hype, what I mean with the tooling hype is the things that happened with Docker, the things that happened with Cube. I mean, even the things that happened with OpenStack, where we went from a community that didn't exist to suddenly there's 2,000 people on the conference talking about a tool they're not using, but they're there. And everybody looks at, hey, there's 2,000 people there, maybe we should use it. And that's the hype, which is not helping us. Hype-driven development is probably not the most mature way of developing software. So why is this? Because we live in an industry where a lot is driven by vendors. And for vendors, it's really hard to sell culture. They cannot do recurring culture sales. They cannot sell it because it's not a product. It's behavior that has to be adapted. It doesn't scale. So those companies are struggling and they're pushing towards tooling because that's something they can sell. They know how to sell it. And the thing is, in an organization, you're going to need to sell that change. You're going to need to sell that you need to work differently. And the organization needs to buy that ID. And that's the really hard part. But vendors are not going to help us there. So that's already a really hard question. Vendors cannot help us. It has to come from the inside. So why would there not be a future? I mean, I already pointed out like a couple of things that completely went wrong. Or completely. But the reason is because this industry is so great at breaking things and ruining awesome stuff. Who likes ITIL? There's already a couple of people like, why not? It's a library full of good ideas. You read it, you say, hey, that's a good idea, I'm going to implement it. You put the book back. It's about reducing risk. There's nothing wrong with reducing risk, right? It's sadly, however, moved to a point where there's a bunch of people who look at it as a Bible which needs to be followed step by step, and you cannot do something different. And it's become a process which actually jumped in the way of improving things. And if you look at the functions and the IDs behind it, there's a lot of good things in there. But if you look at how it was implemented in a lot of organizations, that's where the problem is. There have been a bunch of people who've been implementing these things, who've been certifying organizations that they worked correctly, who had absolutely no clue what the actual goal was, who didn't understand it was a library. Because if we take the people who say no at 10 a.m. in a change management board, and we start talking to them, we say, hey, well, you've got 5 people in a meeting who are technically not capable of making that decision. What about we replace that by a machine? And what about we take all the functions you have and all the processes you have and we automate them? You'll end up pretty close to what DevOps is supposed to look like. So we reduce the risk up front rather than the last 5 minutes. We are not the men who say no, it's basically the machines who say no, proven because there's a test that's failing and not somebody's gut feeling, or somebody's team lead's gut feeling who then goes to talk to his manager, who then sits in a board meeting, who has no idea what he's discussing about. No, it's your CI tool saying, it's broken, I'm not going to go to production. And stability will increase. They were the guardians of production, they didn't want change, and we basically figured out, hey, if we do smaller incremental changes much more frequently, we're going to have a much more stable platform. So those guys are not the enemy. Those guys are the people who actually understood that there are things which you can improve. Only a lot of people have fell into the trap of following the process as opposed to understanding what really needs to be done. Who thinks Agile is dead? I meet a lot of people who say Agile doesn't work. And then you talk to them and you realize they never actually worked Agile. Yes, they might have been doing stand-ups and they might have been working in 2-week sprints. But they've never actually had to decide on, within this sprint, we're going to do this and we're going to commit to it. No, somebody else had done that before them. Somebody else had said, hey, you're going to deliver this in the next 3 months. And there's no negotiation. You're going to do this. You're going to do sprints and you're going to have stand-ups. But that's not Agile. But for a lot of people, that is Agile. So yes, Agile has failed for them. We call it watermill. We call it the scaled Agile framework, which is not Agile. It's waterfall, hidden for managers, giving that false, comfortable feeling that they do Agile, but they fundamentally have not changed a single thing in their organization. And that is something we have with DevOps too. This is what Agile is about. It's not about having a Scrum certified Prince 2 product manager who suddenly knows how to do a stand-up. Is open source dead? No, but it's been hurt painfully by a lot of marketeers, a lot of people who put a stamp on their, hey, it's open source. No, it's open core. You actually don't release anything. You don't have a community. That's not real open source. And this industry has been doing that a lot. I mean, we've moved from grassroots movements where people said, hey, we're going to change this, we're going to fix this, we're going to build great software, to, hey, those guys are onto something. That's a good name. Maybe, and that's the marketeer thinking, maybe if we use that term, which people now like, open source, Agile, DevOps, we can do something with it and we can sell it. Look at the OpenStack community. Anybody using OpenStack? Anybody used to be using OpenStack? Anybody went to the OpenStack Summit? I was talking about Docker like minutes ago. The OpenStack Summits are even bigger. They're completely vendor driven, but it's supposed to be open source. I once sat in an OpenStack meeting where the first topic of the day was to figure out what they were going to do with the 3 million funding and where they were going to have the next big party. Like, this is not what open source is supposed to be about, but you call it open source. So yeah, luckily there's still the good stuff out there, but we need to identify the good stuff and the bad stuff. So, who killed DevOps? Well, I think we all did. I mean, I did, in a way. Because I used to have a talk, 7 tools for your DevOps stack. which I gave way too many times because people were over and over asking me to come over and give it. The thing is that the final note of that talk was, it is about the humans, it is about the people. The people are the tools. But that's not what most people got from it. No, they saw 6 other tools. And they came back 6 weeks later and said, hey, we implemented them all. It's like, no, you missed the point. We spent ages discussing Chef versus Puppet versus Ansible. And the answer is yes. Pick one, whatever. As long as you automate it. Don't do it manually. And then we had the ultimate DevOps tool. I mean, this is not a Docker marketing slogan, but I had marketeers and salespeople come up, hey, Docker is the ultimate DevOps tool. Because now it works in your container. And we had people who were really focusing on tools. And it was not good, but yeah. And the recruiters. If I have to point at a favorite and do a full blameful postmortem, we shouldn't be doing that, I know, but those are the people who kill DevOps. Because they were hiring DevOps engineers. And each time you're like, so what do you want? Do you want a Java developer who knows how to deploy stuff, or do you want an ops guy who can look at a stack trace? We don't know, we'll get back to you. What do you want? Do you want Java people or developers deploying stuff, or do you want operations people who understand things? No, we actually want somebody who does both. Yeah, but you want to pay for a junior. I think Patrick once got a mail from a recruiter, saying, hey, thanks, you finally gave us a way to double the rates for junior Linux engineers. Like, no. Serge van Ginderrechter gave a talk at Low Days a couple of weeks ago, and he's an operations guy, but his pimp sells him as a DevOps engineer. He doesn't like the word, but that's what we ended up doing. Ken tweeted this a couple of weeks ago. This was for him the first job advert where the title was valid, because it was 0 payment, because it's not a job title. Or the DevOps teams. Who's working in a DevOps team? Who's a human being? Okay, there. If nobody responds, then I start thinking that you're either all asleep or, well, yeah. The number of times I've walked into an organization where they had a DevOps team, which was actually that silo in between, it was the default. So we're going to try to collaborate by putting somebody in the middle to make the confusion bigger. Or it was a team in charge of delivery. The worst I've seen was the developers, then the release management team, then the QA team, then the DevOps team, then the operations team. The gap between the developers and the people running the things was so much bigger. It was exactly the opposite of what I wanted to achieve. But those people were hiring DevOps engineers for their DevOps team. And some people joined. And for some reason, things didn't improve. Could be the team in charge of tooling, could be the team in between, but it typically is not what you want. It could be a feature team who has cross-functional resources, yeah. But when I was coaching ING, they had about 150 DevOps teams. And those were developers and people doing application operations. Application operations being not yet the DBAs, but the people who were actually managing the application. Those people had no idea what storage was, what network was. Ops, it took me 18 months to find the first ops person within that organization that I would hire. The gap was bigger, but they had DevOps teams with no ops people. This is another one of my favorite. Who's a certified DevOps engineer here? So for some reason, people think that they can certify you for, pardon my French, not being an asshole. DevOps Days Ghent, the 50th anniversary, we made a joke of it and we said, hey, we're gonna certify everybody who's coming here as a master in DevOps at the University of Dev and Oops. This guy, Buytaert, runs DevOps Days Berlin. He actually beat us by 1 month. He certified all the visitors to DevOps Days Berlin. And they made a bigger fun of it because now you need to go back each year to get your renewal. Does that sound familiar with the other certification schemes? I mean, even the people who now come out and say, hey, we can certify you, who are these people? The first couple of times I bumped into organizations that said, we can certify you for doing DevOps, those were people who'd never shown a foot inside a DevOps Days, who never knew how an open space looked like. And if you looked at their background, never done either development or operations. They did certifications. I'm not a big fan of certifications. I don't like multiple choice exams. There's a couple of exceptions, but I actually walked out of a MySQL certification exam once because the question I had in front of me was, which is one of the core values of MySQL? And the correct answer I had to put in there was, we answer your email. And to me, that was like, I don't even want to be certified. And I went back to the team at MySQL and actually worked on the MySQL cluster certification together with Roland and a couple of other people and improved their certification. But certification is what got us here. ITIL pushed people towards making it a rigid framework with no room for interpretation where you have to follow these and these steps, which didn't make people liked. Scrum certifications took Prince 2 project leaders and made them Scrum masters. Do you already see that there's something wrong with the role of the project manager being the Scrum master? And now basically they put it into a procedure. So on Monday we do the kickoffs, and on Tuesday we do this, and on Friday we do the sprint review, and doesn't sound very agile to me. Oh yes, and your stand-up can last exact 4 minutes and a half because we have 7 people, and he goes first and he goes last. Like, no. Do you see where DevOps certification can go? Yes, there's a bunch of vendors who say, we do DevOps tooling certification. Okay, yeah. But this is, once again, the developers of those tools and the developers of those certifications. We're looking at how can we get more money from our customers? How are we going to give them certification? Doesn't work. So these people, to me, kill that. I mean, they give us DevOps tools. Yes, there were legacy vendors who literally mailed us, can you put the DevOps stamp on this tool, which we've been building for 10 years, which was actually one of the problem tools. Of course, Patrick said no. So, it's hard. I mean, these people need to have a job, and they can't all go flip burgers in McDonald's. So, this is what I ended up realizing after a couple of years of doing consulting. You go into an organization, you explain them a lot of the basics, and they implement the things they like. And then you move on. And at some point, you walk into an organization which says, hey, we are doing DevOps. And you see the ops team in one corner, the dev team in one corner. They're fighting, literally they're fighting. They have DevOps teams, but the CIO is talking, we're doing DevOps. And you're like, who told you that you're doing DevOps? Yeah, we told it ourselves. Like, yeah, but what's your definition? Yeah, well, this. We're doing continuous delivery in quarterly releases. They're back in the same old comfort zone. They haven't fundamentally changed something, but they're trying to jump into that bandwagon and say, hey, we're the cool kids. But what has changed? Not a lot. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard. Change management is a problem. When you go into an organization, you're going to have this approach. You're going to have the first 20%, we're going to be like, yes, we want to do this. We're frustrated. We don't want to work anymore like this. We really want to get out of this hell. And they're going to be your early adopters. They're going to be the people who say, hey, let's do this. And there's going to be 60% of the masses who go like, yeah, this is like the sixth reorganization we had in the last 5 years. It's going to be the same. And then there's going to be the 20% in the back who's like, nope, I'm not going to collaborate. I'm not going to do this. I've done workshops in large organizations where you saw those people in the back. Not pointing to you guys in the back. And you know what you have to do with those people? In order to actually move? You need to fire them. And some of the smart organizations that actually made progress did fire their middle management. The better approach, however, is to realize that those people were pushed in there by the Buytaert principle. They didn't want to go into management in the first place, and that the organization was failing because the only way they could get a higher paycheck was to move into management. And what they should have done is actually treat their engineers better and give them better money. And if you, as an organization, can change that, he's a manager who doesn't like to be a manager towards, he get the same money, but now he's back to an engineer. You actually gain 10 years of experience within the organization, and you got somebody who's back happy again. And that's really crucial. But it's really hard for an organization to say, well, we've been neglecting engineers for the past 10 years, and we've not given you the money you actually should have been getting. How are we going to do it? But that's change management. It's hard. It's really hard. So this enterprise DevOps thing is really critical. I mean, it used to be the small companies. Well, not that small. 150, 300, couple of thousand now. But it's now the banks and the telcos and the utility companies. And everybody was saying, you cannot change those organizations. Yes, you can, but it's going to take you a lot more time. Because there's much more to change. It's going to take a lot longer. And it's going to go in waves. And the resistance you're going to have is much bigger. A small organization has a team which is focused on, that's the goal of the organization. We're going to build this, we're going to do this together. A large organization has a middle management in there with no goal, except to protect their own jobs. So they can boast to their buddies and say, hey, I got 120 people who work for me. I got 121. I got 122. So those people need to be convinced that they need to change, that they need to go back to adding value to the organization. And not only the resistance is bigger, but what we've seen, and there's a quote from Michael Brunton-Spall from when he was at GDS, is that at some point, the antibodies kick in. Just like a human body, it starts reacting. It starts actually fighting the virus or fighting the change. You can go only so far. I'll come back to, or come I back? Yeah, I'll actually do this now. The thing we've seen is that this adoption at enterprises comes in multiple waves. Starts with the first wave where people say, hey, we're going to do this. They got some ideas. That 20% motivated people, they go all the way till they burn out and quit. And then the organizations realized, well, we hired a bunch of people. We told them we were going to do this. They fought, but we didn't let them. Let's try again. And now we've seen organizations that already have like 2 or 3 cycles of people trying to push the change. They've made some progress, but not at the speed they want. In a small organization, 1 wave, you're fine. But large organizations need multiple waves to get that change introduced there. So this is also a fun problem. What we learned over the years is if you go into an organization and say, hey, you're going to do DevOps transformation, that's pretty much a good recipe for disaster. If you go into that same organization and say, hey, we're going to do engineering 2.0, or we're going to do fast delivery, then you optionally remove the discussion about what is DevOps. You bring in the same values, you give them the values, and then they start moving progress. They start moving forward. Because a bunch of the vendors already told them what DevOps is with their flavor. So coming in and telling them what DevOps is again, they go like, yeah, that's the fifth person who says this. No, I'm going to ignore this. But they've never heard of engineering 2.0 or 3.0 because that's new for them. That's local. And then they have a common name to discuss. Who works in an organization by the Spotify model? You know what the Spotify model is outside of Spotify? It's an old school matrix organization in a safe, scaled agile environment. So basically it's a waterfall organization, but they're back towards horizontal management. But they're the cool kids because they're doing the Spotify thing. The Spotify model is a snapshot of what Spotify was doing at some point, where they had a problem at already a level of maturity, where they already had cross-functional self-organizing teams with a high level of maturity that needed to communicate to each other. Most of the organizations you walk into today with saying we're going to do the DevOps, the Spotify model, do not have self-organizing team with high level of maturity. So they don't need to solve the communication problem yet they're trying to. Similar problem. Naming things is hard. So what's on the other side of the enterprise spectrum?
Enterprise what?
Yeah, on the other side of, so you got the enterprises on one side, and what's on the other side? The startups, yeah. Which we these days call YOLO engineering. Because what's the startup mentality? We got 2 years to burn the money, and if we're out, we're out. If we're not, well, we're out anyhow. Their exit strategy is what they're built on. They don't care about resilience. They're going to make the stupidest decisions first. I mean, their customers is the people who are going to buy the company, not the people who are going to buy the product. We're in Europe. Luckily, we see a lot more people here who actually have business, who actually have customers, who think about what they build. But a lot of the things we've seen in the Valley is, nah, this will work for 6 weeks. And then we'll figure out another way. But they're collaborating or not. And we sometimes looked at these cool kids who were doing fancy stuff with new technologies. And both the kids and the technologies don't exist anymore because we're 6 weeks later. Is that how we want to build infrastructures? Is that how we want to deliver software? I don't think so. So we're somewhere 9 years later. We're planning on doing a 10th year anniversary DevOps Days next year, maybe. Well, the organizers of DevOps Day Ghent are planning on sitting together this summer to discuss if we want to do one. Given that we're all busy, might be a year 11, whatever. And this is still the reality. It used to be a slide saying, here's a tarball, put this live. And it used to be something the ops guys got thrown at, like, here's a tarball, it's 5 p.m. on a Friday, we're going home now, you put it in production, and by the way, there's a live radio show or radio commercial at 7, deal with it. And we were like, we don't have machines to do this. What about security? What about backups? How many users? How are we going to scale this? How do you deploy this? And we're back to that. And that's what we need to prevent. Because in 5 years, there's going to be another tool which we can replace, and where you can say, hey, developers build something, works on my machine, works in my container, works in my whatever. My serverless function runs somewhere. I don't know where that's going to run, but needs to run somewhere. And somebody's going to need to maintain it. Somebody's going to need to manage it, deploy it. And that's our biggest challenge. There's a future, because not everybody does YOLO ops, but it's not an easy one. We've been fighting hard for close to a decade to get people to work together, to collaborate. And in a lot of cases we've succeeded, but in a lot of cases we still need to improve. We need to prevent that this happens. We need to teach people history on why we stopped building golden images and how we fix that, and what precautions we need to take to prevent that from happening again. Does that mean we shouldn't be building golden images? No, because now technology has evolved and we can do it a different way. But we should learn how we were managing them and how we had image sprawl and how we couldn't contain anymore what was deployed where. And now the tooling is there that we can do it differently. But that's the lesson we should teach those people. Like, know what you deploy where, know how you build it. Typically, this is what organizations are going to go through. I already told this. We need to tell people this. It's going to be a long journey. It's going to be painful. You're going to have people who are going to leave before you're there. This is a new trend I'm sadly seeing. The people who start the change in the organization, over the past 12 months, I've been working with at least 3 organizations where the people pushing were at C-level, got fired. I was giving this talk in Zurich, and I actually got a guy who came up last week, sent me an email like, hey, I'm number 4. Because he was creating a lot of envy within the organization. He was pushing fast, he was making progress, and he was showing the organization that they could deliver faster. And the antibodies kicked in. His peers, the other managers who could not go that fast, were getting angry at him because he was showing the rest of the business that they were slow. And his boss didn't like that. So be warned. You can get fired for doing DevOps. But then there's a bunch of other organizations who will happily welcome you, probably. And it's not the large organizations alone. It's the young organizations. Well, the ones that used to be young. I mean, I still find it hard to realize that the company I started 11 years ago is 11 years old. We're not the 6 people who started it anymore. We're 85. We're in 4 different countries. We need to learn how to deal with these things. And the things we took for granted when we were 25 people, like, hey, we do continuous delivery, we contribute back to open source, we work together. Those were our defaults. But they're not the defaults for the people who get hired today. We still need to teach them. We need to onboard them. We need to explain them how we worked and why we're doing certain things. Because they don't get this in school. Do they? Do they get this kind of stuff in school in Portugal? No? Yeah. So we need to teach them. And we need to take our experience, which we gained with the past couple of decades of technology, and embrace that and take that knowledge and experience to new tools. Because there will be new tools. And there's going to be good ones, and there's going to be bad ones. And there's going to be some that are easy to exploit for bad communications. And there's going to be awesome ones. But this is going to be our role today. We're going to be teachers. We're going to be students. We're going to be math experts, because statistics do matter. Because no, you cannot read that graph if you have no clue what stuff is going on. I'm not going to be a DevOps. I'm going to be a developer. I'm going to be an operations guy. I'm going to be somebody automating testing. I'm going to be troubleshooting a lot. I'm going to be the person who's going to build that bridge between the different teams, whether it's development operations or security and QA. We're going to have to be those people building those bridges. We're going to have to talk about how we did things the right way. We're going to have to talk about what didn't work. And if you're doing a little bit of DevOps consulting, you're going to be the shrink. Because half of the work I do, first couple of weeks I'm in an organization, I get everybody crying on my lap like, "We're not working, it's not working. Those guys don't listen." It's going to be painful. But this is also still true. Every 18 months we're going to be learning a new job. There's going to be a lot of flexibility and a lot of different things we're going to do. And it's not about those tools, because those tools, as we've learned now, they're going to disappear. They're going to be new tools. It's always going to be about the people. It's always going to be about collaborating for a better future. We need to stand up against a bunch of things. We need to not hire certified people because they're certified. We need to get HR involved. That's another silo. We need to, it's really hard in large organizations, but we need to try to fix outsourcing, because the way the contracts are isn't really helping us. Same with the budgets. So it's not just this, but these are human things. This is people things. I think DevOps is here to stay. There's a lot of things that's going to change. Collaboration is going to be there. It's going to be a requirement. The thing is, the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. And I actually think, and that's a sad reality, it's never going to be. There's always going to be the people who say, "We don't need this. We don't want this." There's always going to be the people who say, "We're doing it," but when you start poking, are not actually doing it. We're going to fix that? I don't think so. But we can fix it for ourselves. And we can choose our path and choose a journey where we can improve software delivery for the people around us and for ourselves. And I think that is the future of DevOps.